Your emotions are not your friends. They are not your guides. They are not the voice of your authentic self calling you toward your highest destiny. They are biological relics from a primitive past, chemical reactions designed for survival in a world that no longer exists, psychological saboteurs that will destroy every dream you've ever had if you continue to mistake their urgency for wisdom. Tonight we confront the most dangerous lie ever told about human potential, that following your emotions leads to fulfillment, that trusting your feelings guides you toward truth, that emotional authenticity is the path to your greatest life. This lie has destroyed more destinies than war, poverty, and disease combined, because it convinces you to sabotage yourself while believing you're being true to your nature. For your entire life, you have been taught to honor your emotions, to express your feelings, to make decisions based on what feels right rather than what produces results. You've been conditioned to believe that suppressing emotions is unhealthy, that rational thinking without emotional input is cold and inhuman, that following your heart will lead you to your dreams. But what if your heart is a liar? What if your feelings are designed to keep you safe rather than help you succeed? What if the very emotions you've been taught to trust are the primary obstacles between you and everything you've ever wanted to achieve? Over the next hour, we will systematically expose how emotions function as destiny destroyers, why successful people learn to override their emotional programming, and how mastering your emotional responses is the single most important skill for achieving extraordinary outcomes. You will discover that every great achievement in history required someone to act against their emotions, and that your emotional reactions are not authentic guidance, but biological interference that must be conquered if you want to reach your full potential. By the end of this exploration, you will understand that the choice facing you is simple and binary. You can follow your emotions into mediocrity, or you can master them on the path to greatness. To understand why emotions are your enemy, you must first understand what emotions actually are and why they exist. Emotions are not mystical insights into truth or authentic expressions of your deepest self. They are biochemical programs evolved over millions of years to help primitive humans survive in dangerous environments that bear no resemblance to the world you now inhabit. Fear exists to keep you alive by making you avoid potential dangers, but in the modern world, it prevents you from taking the risks necessary for extraordinary achievement. Your fear of failure keeps you from attempting ambitious goals. Your fear of rejection prevents you from pursuing valuable opportunities. Your fear of uncertainty stops you from making the bold moves that create breakthrough results. Anger evolved to mobilize your resources for physical confrontation, but in contemporary circumstances, it destroys relationships, burns bridges, and creates enemies where you need allies. Your anger at competitors blinds you to opportunities for collaboration. Your anger at authorities prevents you from learning from those who could mentor you. Your anger at circumstances wastes energy that could be directed towards solutions. Sadness and disappointment evolved to signal loss and motivate behavior changes, but they now function as psychological quicksand that traps you in cycles of rumination and self-pity. Your sadness about past failures prevents you from taking future risks. Your disappointment about unmet expectations creates resentment that poisons your relationships and opportunities. Even positive emotions sabotage your destiny in subtle but devastating ways. Love makes you prioritize others' comfort over your own development. Joy from small achievements makes you complacent about pursuing larger goals. Contentment tricks you into accepting mediocre circumstances when you could be creating extraordinary ones. The emotional sabotage system operates through what psychologists call affect infusion. the tendency for your current emotional state to influence all your perceptions, memories, and decisions. When you're afraid, everything looks dangerous. When you're angry, everything appears threatening. When you're sad, everything seems hopeless. When you're in love, everything seems more important than your authentic goals. This affect infusion ensures that your emotions control not just your immediate reactions, but your entire worldview and decision-making process. You don't just feel afraid. You start believing that the world is more dangerous than it actually is. You don't just experience anger. You begin interpreting neutral events as personal attacks. You don't just feel sad. You start believing that your situation is worse than it objectively is. Consider how this emotional distortion affects your career decisions. When you're anxious about financial security, you choose safe jobs that don't challenge you or develop your capabilities. When you're excited about a new opportunity, you may commit to it without adequate analysis of its long-term implications. When you're frustrated with your current situation, you may make impulsive changes that trade one set of problems for worse problems. The emotional person makes career moves based on how opportunities feel, rather than strategic analysis of where those opportunities lead. They take jobs that make them feel important, rather than jobs that develop valuable skills. They avoid challenges that create anxiety rather than embracing challenges that create growth. In relationships, emotional decision-making creates patterns of dysfunction that persist for decades. You maintain friendships based on comfort and familiarity rather than mutual growth and benefit. You enter romantic relationships based on attraction and excitement rather than compatibility and shared goals. You stay in harmful relationships because leaving feels scary or guilty rather than evaluating whether those relationships serve your development. The emotional person chooses relationships that make them feel good in the moment, rather than relationships that enhance their long-term trajectory. They prioritize emotional comfort over authentic growth, temporary pleasure over lasting satisfaction, familiar dysfunction over unknown possibility. Your emotions also sabotage your destiny through what researchers call emotional labor, the enormous amount of mental and physical energy required to manage your emotional responses and others' emotional reactions. This emotional labor consumes resources that could be directed toward achievement, learning, and development. The person who must constantly manage their anxiety has less energy available for pursuing ambitious projects. The individual who spends significant time processing their disappointments has fewer mental resources for identifying new opportunities. The one who invests heavily in managing others' emotions to maintain harmony has little left for their own authentic development. Perhaps most destructively, your emotions create what we might call destiny drift, the gradual deviation from your authentic goals caused by making small emotional decisions that compound over time. Each choice to avoid discomfort, each decision to prioritize short-term emotional relief over long-term strategic positioning, each moment of following feelings rather than following your plan, moves you incrementally away from where you want to be. This drift is so gradual that most people don't notice it happening. They make decisions that feel right in each moment, while slowly abandoning the trajectory that would lead to their greatest achievements. Years pass, and they wonder how they ended up so far from their original dreams, never recognizing that their emotional responses guided them away from their destiny, one small choice at a time. The emotional sabotage system is particularly insidious because it feels so authentic and natural. Your emotions seem like they're coming from your truest self, providing guidance that must be honored and expressed. But these feelings are actually ancient programs running on outdated software, biological responses that served survival in prehistoric environments, but actively harm success in modern contexts. Understanding emotions as your enemy requires recognizing them as biochemical events rather than meaningful insights. Every emotional response is a cascade of chemicals released in your brain and body that hijacks your decision-making processes, distorts your perception of reality, and motivates behaviors that served primitive survival but sabotage modern achievement. When you experience fear, your brain floods your system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These chemicals prepare your body for immediate physical action, fighting or fleeing from danger. But in contemporary contexts, these same chemicals impair your cognitive function, reduce your ability to think strategically, and motivate avoidance behaviors that prevent you from pursuing valuable opportunities. The biochemical fear response makes you overestimate risks and underestimate your capabilities. It creates tunnel vision that prevents you from seeing creative solutions to challenges. It motivates you to seek safety and certainty when success requires embracing uncertainty and calculated risks. The person under the influence of fear biochemicals cannot accurately assess opportunities because their brain is programmed to focus on potential dangers rather than potential benefits. They avoid networking events because social interaction feels threatening. They decline challenging projects because failure seems catastrophic. They remain in comfortable but limiting situations because change activates their danger detection systems. Anger creates its own biochemical prison through the release of noradrenaline and dopamine, chemicals that create feelings of power and righteousness, while simultaneously impairing judgment and promoting impulsive action. The angry person feels justified in their emotional response while making decisions that damage their long-term interests. Under anger's biochemical influence, you burn bridges with people who could help you, create conflicts that waste time and energy, and make decisions based on emotional satisfaction rather than strategic benefit. The temporary feeling of power that anger provides is paid for with long-term costs in damaged relationships, missed opportunities, and reputation destruction. Love and attachment trigger oxytocin and vasopressin release, chemicals that create bonding and commitment while simultaneously impairing your ability to assess relationships objectively. These bonding chemicals make you prioritize others' needs over your own development, sacrifice your goals for others' comfort, and remain in relationships that limit your potential because leaving feels emotionally devastating. The biochemical bonding response prevents you from making rational decisions about relationships. You maintain friendships that drain your energy because ending them would feel cruel. You stay in romantic relationships that don't serve your growth because the bonding chemicals make separation feel like death. You sacrifice career opportunities for family obligations that don't actually serve anyone's genuine interests. Even positive emotions create biochemical prisons that sabotage long-term success. The dopamine release from small achievements creates satisfaction that reduces motivation for larger goals. The endorphin high from social approval makes you prioritize being liked over being respected. The serotonin boost from helping others can become addictive, leading you to focus on rescue behaviors rather than developing your own capabilities. These positive emotional chemicals trick you into settling for immediate gratification rather than pursuing delayed but greater rewards. You become satisfied with minor successes when you could achieve major breakthroughs. You seek the quick dopamine hit of easy accomplishments rather than enduring the extended effort required for significant achievements. The biochemical nature of emotions explains why emotional people make consistently poor decisions while feeling good about those decisions. Their brain chemistry rewards behaviors that feel right in the moment, while punishing the disciplined choices that would serve their long-term interests. This creates what researchers call emotion-driven decision-making, a pattern where choices are made to manage immediate biochemical states rather than to achieve strategic objectives. The emotional person chooses what will make them feel better right now, rather than what will make their life better over time. Consider how this biochemical influence affects financial decisions. Fear makes you avoid investments that could build long-term wealth, because the possibility of loss triggers anxiety. Greed makes you chase speculative opportunities that promise quick returns but carry excessive risk. Pride prevents you from acknowledging mistakes and cutting losses when investments don't perform as expected. The emotional investor makes decisions to manage their biochemical responses to market movements rather than to optimize their financial outcomes. They buy when they feel optimistic and sell when they feel fearful, consistently buying high and selling low, because their emotions respond to price movements rather than underlying value. In career development, biochemical emotional responses prevent you from making strategic moves that would advance your long-term interests. Anxiety about leaving comfortable positions keeps you in jobs that don't develop your capabilities. Excitement about impressive titles makes you choose positions that look good but don't provide valuable experience. Resentment about workplace politics prevents you from building the relationships necessary for advancement. The biochemical prison also operates through what neuroscientists call emotional memory, the tendency for emotional experiences to be encoded more strongly than rational information, creating biases that distort future decision-making. Your brain remembers emotional events more vividly than logical analysis, so emotional experiences have disproportionate influence on future choices. A single embarrassing failure creates emotional memories that prevent you from taking similar risks in the future, even when those risks might lead to significant success. A painful rejection creates emotional associations that make you avoid situations where rejection is possible, limiting your opportunities for connection and advancement. A financial loss creates emotional memories that make you overly conservative in future investment decisions. These emotional memories create what psychologists call trauma responses, even from relatively minor negative experiences. You develop unconscious patterns of avoidance that prevent you from pursuing opportunities that might trigger similar emotional experiences, even when the potential benefits far outweigh the risks. Breaking free from the biochemical prison requires recognizing that your emotions are chemical events rather than meaningful guidance, temporary states rather than permanent truths, biological responses rather than authentic insights. The person who understands emotions as biochemistry can observe their emotional responses without being controlled by them, can feel emotional reactions without allowing those reactions to determine their choices. This biochemical perspective enables what elite performers call emotional regulation, the ability to experience emotions without being directed by them, to feel biochemical responses without allowing those responses to override strategic thinking, to acknowledge emotional impulses without automatically acting on them. The most successful people throughout history share one common trait. They learn to act against their emotional programming when emotions conflicted with strategic objectives. They develop the ability to feel fear while taking calculated risks, to experience anger while maintaining beneficial relationships, to feel sadness while continuing productive action. This emotional override capacity is not natural or comfortable. It's a skill developed through conscious practice and strategic necessity. The successful person doesn't eliminate emotions, but they subordinate emotional responses to rational analysis and strategic planning. They use emotions as information while making decisions based on objective evaluation of costs, benefits, and probabilities. Consider how successful entrepreneurs handle the fear that naturally arises when starting new ventures. They feel the same biochemical fear responses as everyone else: the anxiety about financial risk, the uncertainty about market reception, the terror of potential failure. But instead of allowing these emotional responses to prevent action, they analyze the specific risks involved and develop strategies to mitigate those risks while pursuing the opportunity. The successful entrepreneur asks, what specific bad outcomes am I afraid of? How likely are these outcomes? What would be the actual consequences if they occurred? And how can I minimize these risks while maximizing potential benefits? They don't ignore their fear. They use it as a catalyst for thorough planning and risk management while refusing to let it prevent strategic action. Elite athletes demonstrate emotional override in their ability to perform under pressure, despite feeling intense anxiety, self-doubt, and fear of failure. They develop mental training techniques that allow them to acknowledge these emotional responses while maintaining focus on the technical execution required for peak performance. The successful athlete experiences the same pre-competition nerves as amateur performers, but they've learned to interpret these sensations as preparation signals rather than stop signals. They use their emotional intensity as fuel for enhanced performance rather than allowing it to create paralysis or impaired execution. Successful leaders override their emotional programming when making difficult personnel decisions. They may feel genuine affection for employees who aren't performing effectively, but they prioritize organizational success over personal comfort. They experience the sadness and guilt that comes with terminating people they like, but they don't allow these emotions to prevent decisions that serve the larger goals of the organization. The successful leader learns to separate personal feelings from professional responsibilities. They maintain compassion for individuals while making decisions based on objective performance criteria and strategic necessities. They accept the emotional discomfort that comes with leadership responsibilities while refusing to compromise organizational effectiveness for emotional comfort. In competitive situations, successful people override the natural tendency to avoid conflict or to handicap themselves to maintain others' comfort. They compete wholeheartedly, despite feeling guilt about others' disappointment, despite experiencing anxiety about social approval, despite feeling uncomfortable with the aggression that effective competition requires. The successful competitor recognizes that excellence serves everyone's interests by raising standards and creating better outcomes. They override their emotional programming that makes winning feel selfish and instead view competitive success as contribution to overall advancement in their field. Successful investors demonstrate emotional override through their ability to make decisions based on objective analysis rather than emotional responses to market movements. They feel the same fear during market downturns and the same greed during market rallies as emotional investors, but they've learned to use these emotional signals as contrarian indicators rather than decision triggers. The successful investor often buys when they feel most afraid and sells when they feel most optimistic, because they understand that markets are driven by collective emotional responses that create predictable patterns. They override their emotional programming that wants to follow the crowd and instead position themselves to benefit from others' emotional decision-making. Perhaps most importantly, Successful people develop what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe their own thought processes and emotional responses without being controlled by them. They become aware of their emotional states while maintaining the capacity to choose responses based on strategic rather than emotional criteria. This metacognitive skill allows them to notice when emotions are influencing their judgment and to consciously override emotional impulses when those impulses would lead to poor decisions. They develop internal dialogue that sounds like, "I'm feeling anxious about this opportunity," which is natural given its uncertainty, but my analysis suggests the potential benefits outweigh the risks, so I'll proceed despite my emotional resistance. The development of emotional override capacity requires what military personnel call stress inoculation, deliberately exposing yourself to uncomfortable emotional states while maintaining effective performance. You learn to function effectively while afraid, angry, sad, or excited by practicing important activities during various emotional states. This stress inoculation builds confidence in your ability to perform regardless of your emotional state, reducing the power that emotions have to derail your strategic plans. You discover that you can take important actions despite feeling unmotivated, make difficult decisions despite feeling uncertain, and maintain focus despite feeling emotional turmoil. Successful people also develop what elite performers call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between different emotional states and to understand the specific triggers and patterns that characterize their emotional responses. This detailed emotional awareness allows them to predict when certain emotions are likely to arise and to prepare override strategies in advance. Instead of being blindsided by emotional reactions, they anticipate emotional challenges and develop protocols for maintaining strategic focus despite emotional interference. They plan their responses to likely emotional scenarios, just as they plan their responses to likely business or competitive scenarios. Finally, successful people cultivate what philosophers call emotional detachment, the ability to care deeply about outcomes while remaining unattached to specific methods or timelines for achieving those outcomes. They maintain passionate commitment to their goals while staying flexible about the strategies and tactics required to reach those goals. This emotional detachment prevents them from becoming so invested in particular approaches that they cannot adapt when circumstances change or when their initial strategies prove ineffective. They remain emotionally connected to their vision while staying strategically open to whatever methods will actually produce their desired results. Mastering your emotions is not about suppressing them or pretending they don't exist. It's about developing the capacity to experience emotional responses without being controlled by them. This mastery requires systematic training, just like developing any other high-performance skill, and the rewards are proportional to the effort invested in developing this capacity. The first step in emotional mastery is developing what psychologists call emotional awareness, the ability to recognize and categorize your emotional states as they arise rather than being swept away by them unconsciously. Most people experience emotions as mysterious forces that suddenly appear and disappear without understanding the specific triggers, patterns, and progression of their emotional responses. Emotional awareness requires becoming a scientist, studying your own psychological patterns. You begin observing your emotional responses with curiosity rather than being consumed by them. You notice what specific situations trigger fear, anger, sadness, or excitement. You identify the physical sensations, thought patterns, and behavioral impulses that characterize different emotional states. This scientific approach to your own emotions creates what researchers call psychological distance, the ability to observe your inner experience without being merged with it. You can notice, I'm feeling anxious rather than simply being anxious. You can recognize I'm having angry thoughts rather than being controlled by anger. This psychological distance is the foundation for all emotional mastery, because it creates a choice point between stimulus and response. Instead of automatically reacting to emotional impulses, you develop a pause where you can choose your response based on strategic considerations rather than biochemical programming. The second step involves developing what elite performers call cognitive reframing, the ability to interpret situations in ways that generate useful emotional responses rather than destructive ones. The same external circumstances can generate very different emotional responses depending on how you frame their meaning and significance. The person who frames public speaking as a dangerous exposure to judgment and criticism will experience fear and anxiety. The person who frames the same situation as an opportunity to share valuable ideas and influence others will experience excitement and anticipation. The external circumstances are identical, but the internal experience is completely different based on cognitive framing. Emotional mastery involves learning to consciously choose interpretations that generate emotions that serve your strategic objectives. You learn to frame challenges as opportunities, setbacks as learning experiences, competition as motivation for excellence, and uncertainty as the natural environment where great achievements become possible. The third component of emotional mastery is developing what military personnel call emotional endurance, the ability to maintain effective performance despite experiencing uncomfortable emotional states. This endurance comes from repeatedly practicing important activities while experiencing various emotional states, until you develop confidence in your ability to function regardless of your feelings. You learn to give presentations while feeling nervous, make important decisions while feeling uncertain, engage in difficult conversations while feeling anxious, and pursue ambitious goals while feeling overwhelmed. This practice builds emotional resilience and reduces the power that uncomfortable emotions have to derail your strategic plans. Emotional endurance also involves developing what athletes call compartmentalization, the ability to separate your emotional responses from your performance requirements. You can feel disappointed about a setback while maintaining focus on next steps. You can experience anxiety about uncertainty while taking actions that move you toward your goals. The fourth element is cultivating what philosophers call strategic detachment, caring deeply about outcomes while remaining unattached to the specific methods, timelines, and intermediate results required to achieve those outcomes. This detachment prevents emotional reactions to temporary setbacks from derailing your long-term strategic focus. Strategic detachment allows you to maintain passionate commitment to your goals while staying flexible about tactics. You can experience disappointment when specific strategies don't work while remaining excited about finding approaches that will work. You can feel frustrated with slow progress while maintaining patience for the extended timeframes that significant achievements typically require. The fifth component involves developing what successful leaders call emotional intelligence in reverse, understanding how others' emotions influence their decisions and learning to work with these emotional patterns rather than being manipulated by them. Instead of having your emotions triggered by others' emotional displays, you learn to recognize emotional manipulation attempts and respond strategically. This reverse emotional intelligence enables you to maintain your strategic focus even when others are trying to influence you through emotional appeals, guilt induction, or manufactured crises. You can recognize when someone is using emotions to avoid rational discussion of issues and redirect conversations toward practical problem solving. Finally, emotional mastery requires developing what we might call values-based decision-making, a clear hierarchy of principles that guide choices when emotions and strategic objectives conflict. Instead of making decisions based on what feels right in the moment, you make decisions based on what serves your authentic long-term interests and deeply held values. This values-based framework provides stability when emotions are fluctuating and gives you a consistent reference point for evaluating opportunities and challenges. You can experience emotional reactions while making choices based on principles that transcend temporary feelings. The development of emotional mastery is not comfortable or natural. It requires going against millions of years of evolutionary programming that made emotional responsiveness essential for survival. But in the modern world, the people who master their emotions, rather than being mastered by them, gain enormous advantages in every area of life. They make better financial decisions because they're not swayed by market emotions. They build better relationships because they choose partners based on compatibility rather than just attraction. They achieve better career outcomes because they pursue growth opportunities despite discomfort. They create better lives because they base their choices on strategic analysis rather than emotional impulses. Most importantly, they discover their actual capabilities rather than living within the limitations that emotional programming imposes on potential. They find out what they can achieve when emotions enhance rather than hinder their efforts, when feelings provide information rather than controlling decisions, when their authentic nature is expressed through strategic action rather than reactive behavior. This choice cannot be postponed, negotiated, or partially implemented. Your emotions are either controlling your destiny or you are controlling them. You are either making decisions based on how things feel or based on strategic analysis of what will actually serve your long-term interests. You are either living reactively at the mercy of biochemical impulses or living proactively according to conscious design. If you choose to continue following your emotions, understand what you are accepting. You are choosing to make decisions based on ancient programming designed for survival in environments that no longer exist. You are accepting that your fear will prevent you from taking the risks necessary for extraordinary achievement. You are agreeing that your anger will destroy relationships that could serve your development. You are committing to let your sadness trap you in cycles of rumination rather than motivating you towards solutions. You are embracing the limitation that your comfort seeking will prevent you from embracing the challenges that create growth. You are choosing the familiar prison of emotional reactivity over the unknown territory of strategic freedom. But if you choose the path of emotional mastery, if you commit to developing the capacity to override your emotional programming when it conflicts with your strategic objectives, you are accepting something far more challenging and infinitely more rewarding. You are choosing to face the discomfort that comes with acting against your emotional impulses. You are accepting the responsibility of making decisions based on analysis rather than feelings. You are embracing the necessity of developing skills that most people never develop, because those skills require going against natural inclinations. You are committing to experience fear while taking calculated risks, to feel anger while maintaining beneficial relationships, to endure sadness while continuing productive action, to resist comfort while pursuing growth opportunities that require sustained effort. But in exchange for accepting this discomfort, you gain access to capabilities and achievements that emotional people never experience. You become able to pursue your authentic goals without being derailed by temporary feelings. You develop resilience that allows you to persist through challenges that stop emotionally driven people. You create the capacity to build the life you actually want, rather than the life your emotions create for you. Your emotions are not your authentic self. They are biological programs that served primitive survival, but sabotage modern success. Your feelings are not wisdom. They are biochemical reactions that distort your perception and motivate behaviors that prevent you from reaching your potential. The person who masters their emotions doesn't become cold or inhuman. They become capable of authentic choice, rather than compulsive reaction. They develop the freedom to act according to their deepest values, rather than their immediate impulses. They gain the power to create their destiny rather than being created by their biochemistry. Every great achievement in human history required someone to act against their emotional programming. Every breakthrough innovation, every successful enterprise, every work of lasting art, every movement that improved human circumstances was created by people who learned to override their emotions when those emotions conflicted with their vision. Your destiny is not written in your emotional patterns. Your potential is not limited by your biochemical programming. Your future is not determined by your past reactions. You have the capacity to become someone who uses emotions as information while making decisions based on strategic intelligence. Your emotions are the enemy of your destiny only if you allow them to control your choices. They become allies when you learn to master them, tools when you develop the skill to use them strategically, and sources of energy when you direct them toward your authentic objectives rather than being directed by them. The path to your greatest life requires emotional mastery. The choice is yours to make. The time is now. What will you choose? You now stand at the crossroads of your destiny. Behind you lies the path of emotional slavery, the comfortable, familiar way of living, where your feelings determine your choices, your moods dictate your actions, and your biochemical programming writes the script of your life. Ahead lies the path of strategic freedom, the challenging but rewarding way of living, where you master your emotions rather than being mastered by them. The true cost of allowing emotions to guide your decisions becomes visible only when you examine the accumulated effect of emotional choices over time. Each individual decision to follow feelings rather than strategy may seem insignificant, but the compound effect of emotional decision-making creates a trajectory that leads inexorably away from your highest potential. Consider the career cost of emotional decision-making. The person who chooses jobs based on comfort rather than growth remains stuck in safe positions that don't develop valuable skills. Over decades, they watch as less emotionally driven colleagues advance to positions of greater responsibility, influence, and compensation because those colleagues were willing to embrace the discomfort required for development. The emotional person avoids challenging assignments because they create anxiety, declines opportunities that require relocation because change feels scary, and remains in familiar industries because learning new fields feels overwhelming. Meanwhile, strategic thinkers embrace these same challenges as development opportunities and gradually build capabilities that create exponentially greater options and rewards. The financial cost of emotional decision-making compounds even more dramatically over time. Emotional investors consistently underperform market averages because they buy during emotional highs and sell during emotional lows. They avoid volatile but high-performing investments because uncertainty creates anxiety. They chase speculative opportunities when excitement overrides analysis. Over a typical investing career, the difference between emotional and strategic investment approaches can amount to hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in foregone returns. The emotional person retires with modest savings, while the strategic person retires with substantial wealth, not because they had different incomes, but because they made fundamentally different decisions about managing emotional responses to market uncertainty. The relationship cost of emotional thinking may be even higher than financial costs, because it prevents the development of authentic connections based on mutual respect and benefit. Emotional people maintain relationships based on comfort, familiarity, and fear of loneliness, rather than genuine compatibility and shared growth. They stay in romantic relationships that don't enhance their development because being alone feels frightening. They maintain friendships with people who drain their energy because ending relationships feels cruel. They participate in family dynamics that limit their potential because disappointing relatives creates guilt. These emotionally driven relationship choices consume enormous amounts of time and energy while providing little genuine satisfaction or mutual benefit. The emotional person spends decades managing dysfunction, while the strategic person develops relationships that actually enhance their life experience and capabilities. The creative and professional cost of emotional thinking manifests in the projects never started, the risks never taken, the innovations never attempted, because emotional responses prevented action that felt uncomfortable but could have produced breakthrough results. The emotional person has ideas for businesses but doesn't start them because failure feels terrifying. They have visions for creative projects but don't pursue them because criticism seems devastating. They see opportunities for professional advancement but don't pursue them because competition creates anxiety. Years later, they watch as others implement similar ideas and achieve success that could have been theirs if they had learned to override their emotional programming. They experience the regret of wondering what if, while recognizing that their emotions prevented them from discovering their actual capabilities. The health cost of emotional thinking appears in the chronic stress, anxiety, and depression that result from living in constant reaction to biochemical impulses rather than developing the emotional regulation skills that create psychological stability and resilience. The emotional person experiences life as happening to them rather than being created by them. They feel victimized by circumstances that they could influence if they learned to think strategically. They develop stress-related health problems because they never learned to manage their emotional responses effectively. Meanwhile, people who have mastered their emotions experience greater life satisfaction, better physical health, and more psychological resilience because they're not constantly at the mercy of biochemical fluctuations and reactive behavior patterns. Perhaps the greatest cost of emotional thinking is what we might call destiny erosion, the gradual abandonment of your authentic potential as emotional decisions accumulate over time. Each choice to prioritize comfort over growth, each decision to avoid discomfort rather than pursue opportunity, each moment of following emotions rather than strategy, moves you incrementally away from becoming everything you're capable of becoming. This erosion is so gradual that most people don't notice it happening until they realize they're living lives that bear no resemblance to their original dreams and aspirations. They wonder how they ended up in circumstances that feel so removed from their authentic desires, while never recognizing that their emotional decision-making pattern created this drift. The emotional person often reaches middle age feeling that life has happened to them rather than being created by them. They experience a sense of being trapped by circumstances while never acknowledging that their emotional responses to those circumstances prevented them from making the strategic choices that could have created different outcomes. The compound effect of emotional costs becomes most visible when comparing the life trajectories of emotional versus strategic thinkers over decades. The strategic person gradually builds capabilities, relationships, and resources that create exponentially expanding opportunities. The emotional person gradually accumulates limitations, dependencies, and missed opportunities that create exponentially contracting possibilities. By the time most people recognize these patterns, they feel it's too late to make significant changes. They've accumulated emotional habits, relationship obligations, and financial commitments that make strategic thinking feel impossible. They continue following emotional patterns while knowing these patterns are limiting their potential because changing feels more frightening than remaining stuck. The tragedy is that these costs are largely invisible to the people paying them because emotional thinking feels natural and authentic. The emotional person experiences their limitations as external circumstances rather than internal choices. Their missed opportunities as bad luck rather than poor decision-making. Their unrealized potential as evidence that dreams are unrealistic rather than recognition that their approach has been ineffective. They live their entire lives without discovering what they could have achieved if they had learned to master their emotions rather than being mastered by them, never knowing how different their experience could have been if they had developed the capacity to act strategically despite feeling emotional resistance.